Today we have a really incredible guest. Her name is Melissa Burns. We're going to introduce her soon in her own words, but we're excited to have her here today and talk more about what she's been doing, the work that she does in Canada, and how she covers education and esports combined. Jarrell is here as well. He'll be co-hosting with me today. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, in your own words then, who are you and what mission are you on?
Well, I have to start by saying that I'm Canadian. I am a settler on Treaty 1 territory, which is the lands of the Anishinaabe, Aniwak, Dakota, Dene, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. But I also am a gamer. I'm an artist and a musician. I am an educator. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a mom. And I love the diversity of my experiences and all that it affords me in my short attention span, and how it allows me to navigate a lot of different spaces. And my mission is within esports is definitely to help elevate it as the place that it can be. And that is a space of belonging for everyone, and working towards creating safe spaces and critical conversations that allow that space to be all that it can be.
I love that. So Bethany and I have obviously been through thick and thin in the world of esports education. But at the same time, I think you and I met really early on. We were both, educators that were interested in this intersection, and then suddenly found our way through some interesting growth and in the global realm of esports as well. So I'm curious, for our listeners, what got you into really exploring this intersection of esports and education? What inspired you to really dive into that connection between gaming and learning?
It's actually a really, really personal story. So allow me to dive in deep here for a second.
That's what we do here.
So I've been a gamer my whole life. I never identified myself as a gamer because that was something that nerdy boys did back in the day. So I didn't actually see myself as owning that identity for quite a while, despite the fact that it's always been a really significant part of my life. But what led me to exploring this particular intersection is actually my son. So my oldest son was born with a congenital heart defect, and as a result, he's had 4 heart surgeries and is going to need more throughout his life. And all of these hopes and dreams that I had for him when I was pregnant and didn't know that he had a congenital heart defect were suddenly upturned when I discovered this about him. And there was a period of grieving where I realized that there were going to be things he wasn't going to experience, things that were a significant part of a lot of us growing up, where you get to have that experience through whether it be sports or different kinds of recreational activity. And I wanted to create a space where my son and kids like him could interact, could have those experiences, and could even develop to the highest level despite their ability or limited ability in other spaces. And I saw this as an opportunity. I always really enjoyed gaming myself, and I had been watching the development. Like, I had been a fan of League of Legends since season 1 from the pro scene. And so long time fan, and just seeing the potential there where it wasn't limited by physical ability, that it opened up a whole new realm of competition opportunities for so many people. I wanted to develop that space for kids like my son. And it didn't exist at the time. I got started back in 2016 was when I started my first program, and I knew that it didn't exist. And so if I wanted to have that opportunity for kids like my kid, then I needed to build it. And so that's what started me on this path. And as I got into it, I discovered so many opportunities and ways to expand it, especially in the education space. And it's been a real learning journey for me, but I never looked back. It's been such an incredible experience.
As a mom, was it instinctual for you to pick up on the EDU side of things, or did that just come from your background? Was that immediate connection for you there between your son and gaming at first, or did it take time even for you to sort of reconcile with that?
Well, I knew that like the youth sport space made a lot of sense, because that's where a lot of those experiences begin for player development. And because I was working in education at the time as a music specialist, I also saw the opportunity to connect with my students in a different way. Music specialists, at least in the province where I work, we get to see our students like 30 minutes, 4 times a cycle. So it's not a ton of time, and a core foundation of great classroom experiences and really unleashing student development, student success comes from building relationships. And so a lot of teachers will do that through extracurriculars. And there were lots of extracurriculars I could have gotten involved with at my school, but I saw this as an opportunity to start something different, start something that wasn't being done, and hopefully connect with students who had a similar interest to me, and just see where that would take me. And I had no idea at the time it would take me to where I am today. But it's been a really incredible experience.
I love that you come from a background in music. I do as well. My entire family studied music, made careers out of it. I'm the black sheep in the family that did not do that, but I was raised around it. And I see so many parallels actually between gaming and the way people develop and learn and music. I'm curious, I'm sure you're much more inclined as an educator. Do you see any parallels between music and esports, and just how people learn, pick up things, develop over time, etc.?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think like the more obvious parallel is always towards physical sport, but
Right.
absolutely with music, because music, especially parallels sport in a lot of ways, where especially if you're working in ensembles, whether that be a rock band, a traditional wind ensemble, or whatever else it might be, you've got a lot of skill development, some steep learning curves. You have to develop persistence and grit and determination and self-regulation, and all those same skills that you learn from a sports experience you have in a music experience as well. And that sense of belonging and camaraderie, and
right.
There's a lot of parallel there.
I'm realizing now we're exploring a unique intersection of music and gaming, but you also come from a world of dance and theater as well. I feel like there's so much to be explored there. I had an opportunity to meet some folks that are in the fashion and gaming space, but some of them are actually operating at the intersection of dance and tech. And I think there's an opportunity as well with dance and gaming. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting too, because when I actually came from a performance background before falling into education. So I was doing that professionally full time. I was doing different musical theater tours of the United States primarily. And at the time, I was looking at actually doing a master's degree in ludomusicology, which is the study of video game music. And I still closet want to do that at some point in my life, because I just think it's so unique. And I think something that's really interesting about, I know this isn't specifically dance, but just digressing for a second here, something that is very unique about the video game music experience is that, unlike other forms of music where you're just a passive consumer, even with movie scores, which people are very drawn to a lot of times because we love characters and stuff like that, video game music is your story, because you are the character and you are experiencing those things. And so when you listen to music that is from the games that you love to play, or you spend a lot of time in, we get drawn into that moment right away. And there's a much deeper connection to that music than in most other spaces, because that's your story, that's your song, that's your music, your experience. And so it's a really interesting intersection of art and gaming that I think is so fascinating. But with dance, absolutely. I think that looking at all of the different neuroprocesses that are required for dance and gaming. There's a lot of parallels, and it's really interesting to see how those intersect and collide in a lot of ways. And yeah, it's such a fascinating area of study.
I can sort of hear it in your voice that this makes you excited to talk about, and you like, oh, let's get it all out. There's so much more there. If only I could tell you kind of feeling, which makes me so happy. But you've done so much recently, but also, just throughout your career, you've written books, you've been part of the integral textbooks for educators, but you've also now lead Team Canada, which is the esports intersection of this global competition. How do you go about building something that has no framework to begin with? And I think it probably has to do with some of that passion that I'm hearing in your voice, but realistically, how have you done so much in this space?
Honestly, not alone. I think that's a really big part of it. The people that I surround myself with are a really, really important part, a really integral part. And I think something that I tried to initiate from the very, very, very beginning was just assuming that I was never the expert. I wanted to make sure that if I was going to be facilitating the creation of something like this, of a national structure, or even just esports programs in schools, that I saw myself as a facilitator of that process. And particularly with Canada being such a large country geographically, but also because of that because of that geographical stance, there's also a lot of cultural variance across the country. I knew that there was no way for me to actually know what each community needed specifically. And so I needed to build a network of folks who were directly connected to each of those communities, which took a lot of input and time and effort and relationship building with people from across the country. And so it was definitely not ever something that I did alone. It had to be done in partnership for it to be an authentic experience for Canadians. Because as an educator, especially one like I try very hard to take a very strong EDIA and anti-racism lens to all of my pedagogy and methodology in my teaching. I wanted to apply that in my education space, in the esports space as well. And in that regard, I like an analogy I like to use is that if I'm standing in front of a building, yes, the other sides of the building exist, but I don't know what they look like. The only way for me to know what those look like at the same time is for me to have people around the building from different perspectives who can tell me, what does it look like from your side? And so having that open line of communication with people from across the country, from all the different game genres across the country as well, because FGC has different needs than the FPS community, and being able to really connect authentically with each of those groups was really, really integral to the creation of our framework. And so to this day, that connection, that sort of national community is a really big part of what we do and how we continue to operate and grow.
I love that. I mean, the Lurkers community is really starting to grow. And I think similar to, what you've done, it's being intentional, right? Thinking intentionally about the communities that you're serving and really trying to build something that is reflective of those communities. And I think that's incredible. And it's been amazing to see, I alluded to it earlier, but starting as educators, in a classroom, and then suddenly finding yourself in this broad national and global development of esports, esports and esports education. I mean, it's been quite the journey, and I'm sure, that growth was not without its growing pains. I'm curious to hear, especially being a woman in a male dominated industry and really putting something together that is very intentional. What are some of the maybe roadblocks and challenges that you experienced as you were building?
Yeah, it certainly creates a very unique experience entering the world of global esports as a woman in the space. Some of my earliest experiences were around people assuming that I was just the first line of communication, and that I would pass on the information to whomever my president happened to be. So there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of just like entrepreneurial strategy that has to be used when entering those kinds of spaces, thinking about like, even the fact that I'm a classically trained operatic soprano, coloratura soprano. I have a naturally very, very high voice, and intentionally having to think about lowering the decibel of my speaking voice to be taken more seriously. Those are the things that I think some of my counterparts don't have to consider when they enter these spaces. But it's this sort of justifying why I'm in this space and do I belong, and entering a lot of conversations where they even ask me, well, do you even play any games? There's just a lot of assumption that is made in the space. And I think that as I continue to have some of those critical conversations and some of those hard conversations with folks, it has gotten easier. And the nice thing is that for the most part, while it can be a challenging space to navigate and there are extra obstacles in some cases, I do have a lot of really great allies. And something that has been really valuable to me is some of the men who I work with who understand allyship in those spaces as not speaking for me, but supporting me and redirecting the conversation when they try to address my male counterpart as opposed to me. That kind of allyship is really, really valuable, and being able to work with men who respect me and what I bring to this space, and it has really been a huge asset. And so Matt Kovacs is a really great example of that. He had been by my side in a lot of challenging conversations in the early stages of development in this organization. And I really owe him a debt of gratitude for the way that he was able to support the work that I was doing and never overshadow what I was doing, but support it in really meaningful ways. It's never easy, but definitely worth it. And I'm willing to have those hard conversations so that hopefully the next generation of women in this space will not have to have as many of those hard conversations. We'll see what happens, but that's the hope.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's very real. And I'm curious too, because of your background, what you've personally experienced, and also the mission that you're on, how do you think through designing inclusion or spaces that allow for that in this sort of system that's already here and wasn't inherently designed for that? How do you sort of backtrack, or is that the mentality? How do you bring inclusion into this sort of wonky system we're in now?
Yeah. So something that's really interesting about the Canadian space specifically is that while there aren't a ton of statistics, the one source that has been really reliable for us to the Canadian market specifically is from the Entertainment Software Association of Canada. And they publish like a gaming and esports report every 2 years roughly. So they should have a new one coming out shortly. But their most recent one was published in November of 22. And in that report, it showed that in Canada, at least, 51% of gamers identified as women. Obviously, there are limitations to this research study because it was in a binary setting, so it doesn't truly capture what the gaming community looks like beyond a limited binary sort of lens. But within that space, if 51% are identifying as female, and we know that in the pro space, we're looking at like less than 10% are being represented as female in that space, then there are systemic barriers to success. There is something that is holding people back from being able to enter those higher levels of play and competition. And I wanted to be able to address that, but not just for women in this space, because one of the things that has always bothered me is that while we have a lot of emphasis on girls in gaming and women in gaming, it's missing so many other equity deserving groups, so many other underrepresented gaming groups. And so something that I've been trying to do is honestly just listen to the various communities, ask for their advice, ask for their perspective on things. And I'm actually really excited to share that we are going to be launching an EDIA campaign for Esport Canada. It's going to be one of our ongoing initiatives permanently, called the XP Boost. And what it aims to do is elevate the voices of underrepresented communities and equity deserving communities in gaming in Canada. And so what we're going to do is have those communities lead the charge. We're just providing the platform, and they get to then mentor the next generation. And so it's sort of this partnership model between the leaders in those communities and the voices of those communities, and allowing them to invest in the next generation through different initiatives and tournaments and all kinds of different activities that we can connect with the next generation through our post-secondary division and our education division, so that we can provide the next generation with role models, with examples of practice, of people who are successful, who look just like them, who represent who they are as individuals, and see themselves, picture themselves in that place of success, so that we can see those communities grow and just provide them with that platform. So it's not about Esport Canada, it's about the communities in Canada and just giving them a platform to do that.
I really love that. It's interesting because esports, the gaming community, or just the gaming industry, really, it's had its ups and downs. And, now we're finding a lot of educators who have entered this space, like all of us here, and really bringing in that longer term view lens. I think is really interesting because, historically it's been kind of just every year by year, and we'll see what happens. But the fact that you're really taking the time to be intentional about planning for the next generation, and I think a lot of that comes from the heart of an educator, I think is really important. And yeah, it'll be interesting because I think the communities that you're serving and helping grow, they really are going to be the future leaders of this space. So I love that. Maybe shifting topics a bit, Bethany alluded to the fact that you've also contributed to esports research, which I think is incredible. And I think there's still a long way to go with not just esports as an industry, but also how do we create a better industry through the intersection in education. So I'm curious to hear maybe some insights from some of the research that you've done, and maybe some other research, future research that you're working on as well.
Yeah, I think the research I had published on back in 2021 is very connected to that topic we were just exploring, where the focus of that research was really on that intersectionality of women in gaming and girls in gaming. I know when I had started my esports program, I had made the assumption that being a woman in the space, that girls were going to come and be part of the program. And I was shocked when they weren't. They didn't show up. I'd go walk around the school at lunch hour, and I'd see the room full of male identifying students in my room that were playing games. And then I'd see in the classrooms where the students were eating lunch, and I had a ton of female identifying students on their phones playing mobile games, but they weren't part of the esports program that I had started. And so after speaking with them and talking with them, I realized that it wasn't a safe space for them, and that what they needed, particularly developmentally in the junior high space, that sort of grade 7 to grade 9 area, that what they needed to have an infinity space. They needed to have a space that was dedicated to them. It didn't mean that they couldn't be part of that co-ed space. It meant that they needed something in addition to that. And so my research showed the progression of the first 2 years, where I offered simply just an open co-ed gaming opportunity, and what the gender split was in that space. And then the following year, the third year, I offered a girls only, or it was actually an LGBTQ and girls only gaming day in addition to the co-ed day, and how the progression throughout that year showed like right off the top, we had like basically an even split in terms of numbers. But by the end of the year, I had more LGBTQ and girl gamers than I did of the AMAB students. And watching how they grew in confidence from that safe affinity space for gaming, and more of them were getting twice as much experience now because they were able to come and participate on both days. So that was part of my research in the early stages. But as I've gotten deeper into things, my focus recently in the esports in education space has actually shifted focus away from just the EDIA space, not because it's not important. We're continuing that work, but looking at safeguarding. Right now, esports is kind of a wild west, and there aren't any regulations in place or standards in place to protect students in these spaces. And so what we've been able to do at Esport Canada is look at developing a framework for safe sport within esports. But one of the things that we've found very challenging at this particular point in time that is still an area of need for development is around safe sport in virtual spaces. Because while there are lots of resources for us to draw on and implement around the UCCMS for safe sport, those pertain to physical spaces. And so there are protocols and procedures in place that protect students with like open door policy and those kinds of things that allow coaches to have those important conversations with students in private settings, but in a way that is safe for both the coach and the player. We don't have that established anywhere for virtual spaces. And knowing the reputation of virtual spaces and how they can be a prime ground for grooming, this is something that has to be addressed. And so part of what we're doing now is just building a case and an advocacy case for protection that we are demanding from political leaders, from our different spaces, that these protocols, that these guidelines for safe sport need to be applied. And now they can't be an afterthought. We can't wait 20 years and then deal with all of the fallout of a poor system. We need to build the system now and implement it now to make sure that students are safe as they participate. And I think that's going to be really, really important, and a really important conversation over the next, I'd say, 2 to 5 years. I'm hoping it'll be established by then, but we'll see.
Yeah, in a space that just thrives on constant competition, and that tends to be, I even think, a lot of the educators' priority when starting and maintaining, obviously winning, getting into tournaments, jumping into leagues, regardless of who those kids are in their club. How would you advise someone in that position to prioritize community? What are some simple steps that they could take if they've already gotten started and they're competing but haven't quite figured out that community piece?
I think that there are a lot of different opportunities. I know a lot of our early development of esports has focused on sort of that varsity model where you've got those extracurricular activity, school sport kind of vibe. And I do think that that is still an important part of the ecosystem because it is our easy in. It is a model that is recognized and familiar with a lot of individuals. I think establishing some co-created group norms, having those conversations with students right at the beginning is really important to establishing a really healthy community. Something that's really unique about esports, and I've personally experienced it in the teams that I've coached, is that because esports is so widely accepted and participated in, you get a really unique cross-section of students who wouldn't necessarily be on the basketball team together or the hockey team together. I remember one year where I ended up having one of the Reddit kids in my class on the same Rocket League team with one of the with the hockey team captain. And they didn't have a great relationship generally, but now that they were on the same Rocket League team together and had a season to play, it changed the dynamic of their conversations, because now there was an expectation, a very clear expectation, and they were motivated. And I think that that's something that's really unique and gives us a really cool opportunity when we're working with our students, is that there's an external motivator to get them to develop some of these really important life skills. And so that's a really fun opportunity to explore, but something that is a really neat extension to that, that we are hoping to establish here in Canada within the actual curricular landscape of esports and education, is a curriculum that parallels that of phys ed. We know that students are gaming. The vast majority of students are gaming, and that is a really big reason for us to be intentional in the way that we approach it and equip our students to navigate these spaces on their own time. And so what we're hoping to establish is an early years curriculum that would parallel your early years phys ed curriculum, where in phys ed you'd be looking at like gross motor skill development, fine motor skill development, having fun while moving your body, keeping all of those same elements, but looking at it through a lens of digital literacy. So even something as simple as introducing Minecraft as an option for early years esports, where now all of a sudden they have to actually look at something like file management, and what a critical skill that is for so many people. And that is not currently being taught explicitly, and a lot of adults need help with.
Yeah,
And then
I agree with that for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, if we were actually to be intentional about teaching that skill, oh, that'd be so huge. Game changer. And then you move into that middle years area, where now all of a sudden we're exposing them to as many different genres as possible and establishing really clear expectations around behavior and what it means to be part of those communities, so that they can find a genre of games that they really enjoy, because we want them to be able to engage in those communities as they grow older. And then in high school, just looking at specializing and honing in on some of those skills so that they can be successful in those spaces, because we know that they're going to be playing regardless of whether we bring it into school or not. But this allows us to change the conversation so that we can establish a sort of a new expectation for what it looks like to have digital citizenship within your gaming experiences.
I love that. I think, obviously, with all of the work that you've been doing, you've really helped evolve this space. I mean, you can think about esports and education 3-4 years ago, and the big question was why? Like, why esports? Like, why is there any value? And I feel like now, especially, hearing from you, it's really diving deeper into the what and the how. Mm-hmm. But now thinking maybe towards the future, like let's just say the next 5-10 years, maybe, where do you see the future of esports in education and academia?
I think we're going to see a continued progression in the varsity space. Like, that's already pretty well established. So I think that's really going to flourish and grow over the next little bit. We've even seen now in Canada, at least, departments of education that are taking it from the provincial level. Education in Canada is provincially mandated. So when it's coming from the provincial level, like that's your highest level of governance. And so seeing that established is really, really encouraging. Seeing more schools and teachers take initiatives to bring this into their curriculum is really exciting. Seeing a lot of departments of education look at their STEM curriculum renewal and including esports explicitly as part of it is really, really exciting. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for a lot of career development, skill development. We talk a lot about global competencies and accessing development of global competencies through esports. And the other thing that is really significant that has been really encouraging to see here in Canada is also the use of esports in cultural reclamation, in reconciliation. We've seen a lot of northern First Nations communities that are now using esports in schools as a way to engage their young students in language development. So bringing in elders, knowledge keepers, people who carry the language, the languages of the First Nations peoples. There's so many languages, and using esports through shoutcasting as an opportunity to re-engage with culture and language in ways that connect with the next generation. And that's been so cool to see. We have here in Manitoba, Moose Tree Gaming is a really, really great example of that, where he is actually a phys ed teacher himself, and he has a stream that he does, Moose Tree Gaming, and it's so exciting to see how he's able to connect the community of Thompson, the First Nations community up there, and across the country in just mainstream exposure to Indigenous culture and language. And it's so exciting to see the possibility and the opportunity there to continue our work of truth and reconciliation here in Canada.
There are a lot of reoccurring themes for Darrell and I know you haven't been listening to all the podcasts as of recently because we've been recording them. But you just brought up another pivotal thing for us, which is this cross-cultural exchange and the Olympics, which it sounds very similar to what you're talking about with there's so much beyond just the game itself, where there's potentially access for students to language exchange, meeting other people that they normally wouldn't. How do you feel about esports in the Olympics and this recent announcement that it's been included and qualifiers begin? How do you as an educator view all this?
You know what? I'm going to be split on this. I think there are great aspects of this, and there are other things that are challenging.
Tell me.
Yeah. So I think I'm connected to a lot of really, I would call them almost like esports purists who have a lot of criticisms for esports in the Olympics. But I also see the benefit of esports in the Olympics from a credibility standpoint, and how it is an established organization that people respect and people are drawn to. And I think that it allows us to have a lot of conversations around global community, which is just such a beautiful thing. And I think that's something that we need to be emphasizing, and that we need to be leaning into right now, is listening and understanding. And something that is a beautiful thing about gaming is it provides us an opportunity to connect with people from different spaces, from different places, from different experiences, languages, cultures, through a commonality, through a shared interest. And I think that has a lot of opportunity to teach us a lot of lessons as a society. And so I see that as just a really, really beautiful opportunity. And I think that is something that makes it such a cool opportunity for us to explore and lean into as something that brings us together. I'm really excited to see how it evolves. But I know that in terms of practicality, it actually has opened a lot of doors because of the reputation of the Olympics, and just how that brings a new audience to the conversation. I think the gaming community has understood for a long time the opportunity of esports to connect people. My cousin got married a couple years ago, and almost the entire guest list of non-family members were people he was meeting for essentially the first time ever in person, because they were all his COD community. And some of his wedding party, his groomsmen we're coming in and meeting him for the first time in person, but he plays COD with them every single day. So it wasn't meeting them for the first time, but it was meeting them for the first time and it's so cool. Like, it's so normal for the gaming community to recognize that. But now being able to open that opportunity to a larger audience is just so incredible. So I'm excited for it.
Well, to wrap up, I have one last question for you, which is, how do you measure impact? You're doing a lot, and it seems like your mission is to impact marginalized communities at its core. So how do you actually measure your success throughout all this? What does that mean to you?
I would say that from like a KPI business perspective.
No KPIs. No KPIs.
Yeah, we don't like KPIs over here. We've been running with KPIs for quite some time. You can take it whatever direction you want. Yeah.
Like, if we're talking business, I mean, like, it's still a bit of a scary space, let's be honest. But when it comes to social impact, to me, that's the winner there. If it's making a difference in someone's life, if it's creating an opportunity for someone, if it's even just allowing a conversation to happen for a new perspective to be had and shared, I think that's a huge win. And I think about, like, especially as an educator, I've had students challenge me because of esports and have changed the way I view things. And I think that is such a beautiful gift. And I've also seen it impact the lives of students. I had one student who struggled, like, he just had a lot going on in his life, and coming to school was a struggle. And his school plan was just stay for half the day. Like, that was a success. He joined our esports team, and he was an incredible Smash player. And he knew that we practiced Tuesdays after school. And if he wanted to be there and he wanted to compete and be part of that experience, he had to be there for the full day. And so here's this kid who his whole expectation, his whole school plan was just be there for half a day, was now staying for a full day at least once a week, because in that moment, he felt seen, he felt valued for what he brought to the space. He knew that other people recognized the value and potential in him. And to me, that's the win. Finding those opportunities to help students, help people in general, to see their value, to see their purpose, to feel heard, valued, and seen for who they are and what they bring. That's the win. That's all I need to keep going.
I love that. We may not be rich, but we're wealthy, and may not have dollars, but we got change.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing all of those W's. That's a massive one. I can't wait to share that with our audience. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us today. I wish we had hours more to spend, because you're an incredible person. And honestly, thank you for everything that you've done, because your impact it feels like it's just started and it's already been so deep, and there's so much more to be done. So I'm so glad you're part of our Lurking community and you're doing so much for the space. So thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having me.